Howdy folks. Today we have Ray Novak, N9JA, with Icom America in the house. He's giving us a little overview on some of the current model Icom radios, the ID4100, the ID5100, the IC7300, the IC705, and the newest one to my radio collection, the IC7100. So let's check it out today on K5ATA, Ham Radio.
Well, Steve, you kind of built up a collection of Icom radios since the first time we ran into each other.
We have. We've collected quite a few. The 7300 is the Padawan radio, and we've accumulated a few of them. So.
And then your direct harmonic.
Yeah. The child unit has the 705, and then we have the 5100 that we've been using in the truck, and the newest one to the batch is the 7100, which I'm anxious to get installed in the truck as well.
And since I drove over, I brought in my 4100 just to give you a comparison. And you made the comment that your mom-in-law was looking for a new radio so you can get your 2-meter mobile back.
Yeah, she's got my trusty Icom 2100, and looking at the size of that, and the face comes off of that, which you showed me, that is the perfect size for her little Toyota pickup truck. So, Mama, you might need to spend that.
Well, we've had a lot of people say, well, I'd love to have a 2-meter mobile with a remote head. Well, by the time you look at the expenses to design a radio to have the remote head, why not put 440 in it as well? And that's what the ID4100 does, where it's powered on right now, but the head comes off and you can put the body somewhere else in the vehicle, just like you do the big brother, the 5100.
Yeah. So she can mount this under the seat, behind the seat, or whatever, and then you just run the control cable to the head.
And I use this in my pickup, and I've got a 14-inch touchpad screen in the middle of the console of the truck. So this sits right underneath it, and it's small enough that I'll put it in scan mode, and if I hear somebody, I'll talk to them.
Turn that around so you can see how big that, or how small I should say that is. So for comparison purposes, to compare it to the 5100. So now that works really well for, a lot of cars have those little coin slots almost, and that looks almost like it would fit perfectly into one of those.
We have caught some flack because one of the things about the Icom radios, and when we were looking at today's vehicles, it's kind of difficult to find a good spot to mount a radio. So with the remote head, everybody goes, well, you should include the brackets. For what? Yeah, the cost is still going to be in there. If we include it in there, you're going to be paying for the brackets. It's not like they're in there free. So where would you put it? We were talking last night to one of your friends that had a 5100. I'd taken a visor clip off of an old pair of sunglass cases, from the 80s, where you could just slide it onto your visor and put your glasses in there. I took one of those, put it on my 5100, so I would fold it down, I would see the frequency display, but then I would close it back up. Why pay that extra money for building your own clip? Or I think you did a segment on...
I did. In fact, I did a couple videos on how I was going to mount that in the truck and tried out a couple different options. And I hadn't even thought about the sun visor because that's thin enough that you can easily fold it back up. But, I ended up going with a cup holder mount that you can rotate however you need to rotate. And that works well for me. But you're right, I don't want to pay for a bracket that I may or may not use. So.
And then some of our radios, like the 7100, but the 7100 and the 705 have the quarter 20 thread pattern on the bottom. So there are mounting solutions that you'd screw a ball into, or we've got a tripod here. So many different ways of mounting these things today. Hey, you'd know our camera person tells us off camera that the radio was off during that last portion.
But it wasn't actually off.
Radio was still received, but screensaver. or battery saver.
So yeah, the power LED on this one, I believe it's on that side over here. So it was flashing green, so it was in standby, so you can still hear and everything. It's just not.
Yep.
It's saving that energy because one of the larger energy users on most devices is your screen.
But there again, we're running it just off of the battery pack.
So, and it's been on. We've been here a couple hours, and it's been on that whole time. So.
And we also received an image we transmitted over D-Star to just see what it looked like. You'd never seen a
I'd never seen
photo
it go through on
transmit
D-Star,
before.
so that was cool. So, and the cool thing is when we talked about, you can actually do that over HF now too. So D-Star over HF, which I'm anxious to try out. So.
Well, the radio can do it. It's kind of like automotive manufacturers. Speed limits are 55, 75, 85 out in Texas, but they make them where they'll go 200. We don't say you can do transmit D-Star pictures on HF, but there's nothing to stop you from doing it. But we did this one on 2 meters. One of the interesting things, you mentioned last night that a friend of yours was looking at, he had a 7000 and he's like, I'm looking at the 7100, but I just don't like the display. But let's back up just a little bit. When we went from the 706 to the 7000, there were so many people that complained because the screen was smaller, the characters were smaller because there's a lot more information on the 7000 display. So we got to hear people go, why did you put a smaller font? Why did you do this? But then they started adjusting to that color display. It had composite video out so they could put it to a bigger monitor. I mean, some even had like a Nissan vehicle where it had the video input for the kids could watch a movie in their vehicle. So there were people that were doing that. Then we came out with a 7100 and it was like all of a sudden the brakes got locked up. People started slowing down. It's a great base station. I mean, everything is in the head from extendable feet to the speaker, your key, your CW key, external speaker, microphone plugs into it. Everything goes into the head. I've actually got a friend of mine who has a remote rig. The body stays back in Finland, I think it is, or it will be in Columbus, Mississippi, where his second home. And he travels with the head in the other remote rig box. And wherever the body is, he can control everything with just the head. He loved that. We couldn't do that with the 7000. There were people that were buying competitors' radios because the 7000 wouldn't do that. So we looked at all the things that you could do with the 7100. But how does it look in a vehicle? Everybody wants to look at it straight on. And that really isn't the best way to operate the radio because you cannot see all the buttons across the top. I've always suggested put it a little bit of an angle. And the display is much sharper at that viewing angle, and you can clearly read all the buttons across the top.
Yeah, when you pointed that out earlier, that's the first thing I did is, I kind of held it down where the radio might actually be in the truck. And you're right, when you have it down at that negative kind of camera, whatever, it is a lot more crisp. You don't have the glare, I guess. It takes a lot of the glare off of the screen. And I mean, it's a significant difference. And I hadn't even thought about that. So, I'm glad you pointed that because anticipating putting it in the truck, I was either going to stick it on the dash somewhere or back in that cup holder. And I was already thinking about how I'm going to angle it up to point straight at me. But you're right, I actually want it pointed a little bit down.
I know one guy that has the King Ranch in a 350. He put it up where the sunglass holder is on the King Ranch 350s. He put the head up there and it's just sitting there on an angle. He says, I can see the buttons and just touch it. It's more of a heads up type display.
And that way I can take the sunglass holder off that somebody might or might not be using. All right, Ray, we've talked about all these, but you kind of left that one out.
Yeah, can you believe it? 5 years ago, the 7300 came out. Just about anybody you talk on the air today has got one. A few people have got a couple of them. Your Padawans are excited over having this one. But It's probably the best bang for the buck right now on the market. It's interesting to watch as we're seeing the sunspot cycles. People are making comments, oh, the SDRs are going to fail now that we have great sunspot cycles. That's just like complaining that your Corvette goes too fast in a curve. Just let off the gas. Back off the gain a little bit. If it's just saturating it, you're seeing the OVF come on, turn off the preamp. The preamps don't have to always be on modern radios today. It was a feature that you had to have on the older radios to help you receive the weaker signals or to compensate for the components that were used in receivers at that time. But today's radios, you don't have to run with the preamp on. And a lot of new hams that are coming in that are new generals that are starting out with a 7300, a lot of them don't understand all that, but the old timers, the first thing they say is, well, make sure the preamp's on. And when you look at 40, 80, and 160 meters, preamp on really hurts your capability of receiving those signals because you've got a lot of strong signals down in that portion of the band. So learn about the RF gain, learn to back off a little bit. You do have the preamp off, and heck, it's even got an attenuator on it as well.
So now, real quick, you mentioned when the OVF comes on. So for folks that aren't familiar, what are we talking about here?
The OVF is an overflow indication. So what you're doing is you're digitizing a swath of spectrum. And when you have a lot of real strong signals, you're just cramming too much information. You can either do one of two things. You can either decrease the bandwidth or you can decrease the sensitivity. So again, turn the preamp off. What you're doing is if you're listening for a weak signal, allow the DSP and the FPGA and the radio to focus on the signal. And you'll be surprised that if you turn off the preamp, sometimes that weak signal will just come right up because it's not having to process all that data.
Ray, thank you for giving us a little overview on some of these Icom radios. Kind of helps us steer a little bit when it's time to start picking out that new rig. And we also have coming out a series on some tips, tricks, and hacks with these same Icom radios. So be on the lookout for that. Y'all make sure you hit that like button, hit subscribe, and hit that bell so you get notified when that next video drops.